What do you see as the biggest mistakes that property investors make when buying a property?
I'm going to just put it out there and say relying solely on data. There's a lot of inconsistency and a lot of inaccuracy in property data. So anyone relying purely on property data, one, you're looking in the rear view mirror, and there's a reason why the windscreen is a lot larger than the rear view mirror, because we need to look forward. But two, property data can be a little misleading if you're going to rely solely on data. I think data is a fabulous tool to use in conjunction with local expertise.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show for Australians who want to learn how to unlock their full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and to live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life that you really want. Let's get started.
Hi, freedom fighters. What are your thoughts on Brisbane and southeast Queensland as a good property investment opportunity? And what do you really need to consider in order to buy and secure an outperforming property? And is a local area specialist buyer's agent your better and best bet to find, negotiate and secure your next property over yourself or a national buyer's advocate? These are all topics that we're going to unpack in the second part of our continuing chat with Melinda and Scott Jennison from Brisbane's Streamlined Property Buyers. Because it's fair to say that despite showing all the signs of strong growth potential, for many years prior to COVID, Brisbane failed to be the bride and remain the bridesmaid, as values flatlined, but post-pandemic values continue to be very much on the rise. And apart from the long overdue affordability catch-up in Perth and Adelaide, Brisbane continues to be a very strong, sustainable property performer. So we'll be interested to hear more on where it's all heading in the River City and surrounds. And on a parallel subject, one of the most overused but misunderstood terms that I hear when buying property today is due diligence. But what is due diligence and what does it really entail? Because for me, due diligence isn't just a matter of sitting on your desktop or laptop and scrolling remotely through facts, figures and historic data points and then trying to post-justify why an area and a property appears to be good by burying it in kilos of historic metrics. Sadly, I have a growing sense that a lot of what is being measured doesn't actually matter in property, and on the flip side, a lot of what really matters can't be measured. Because property performance isn't just a hard science, it's an intuitive art. It requires imagination to envision and predict the future of what an area and a property is going to look like in 10 to 20 years, so that you actually need a forward-facing telescope, not a rear-view mirror microscope, to do this effectively. And this is something that is this something that you have the time and skills to do yourself? Or do you need someone who specializes in property and the area that you're looking to buy it in to achieve optimum outcomes? These are all key subjects that are important to your future property portfolio's planning and performance, and we're going to unpack them with our returning guests, Melinda and Scott Jennison, who are life and business partners driving the growth of award-winning Streamlined Property Buyers in Brisbane. And Melinda is also now the president of REBA, the Real Estate Buyers Association of Australia, that only allows the best buyers agents to become members after a rigorous qualification process and has a strict code of conduct that each of the select members must abide by. It's for all these reasons that I've interviewed and continue to interview buyers agents here on the show, because I want to help you to learn the ins and outs of this mission-critical property buying process and to expose you to a range of buyers agents that will ultimately help you to identify the right approach as well as the right buyers agent to suit you, who's not only experienced and expert at what they do, but just as importantly, are the right fit for you. Because you need to listen to your gut intuition on this. As a buyer's agent or any other property professional may be good at what they do, but if your highly tuned BS indicator is flashing, then you need to listen to this and go with your gut. As I keep reinforcing, there's no one-size silver bullet solution in property because everyone's different. So you need to keep looking until you find a professional that not only does right, but feels right and is aligned with your values, your strategy, your goals and your personality, because the devil's always in the details here. As a quick aside, if you need to get some help in selecting the best buyer's agent for you, so that you can reject the others that don't fit, feel free to email me at hello@knowhowproperty.com.au by clicking the link in the show notes with a subject header, questions to ask a buyer's agent, to get a copy of the 37 odd questions that we ask potential buyer's agents to decide if they're actually worthy of further consideration. Because it's all about getting a good, proven professional buyer's agent who's an expert and specialist in their locations and property type. And today's returning guest, Melinda and Scott, and their Streamline Property Buyers team are a very good example. Now, last week we delved into their personal, professional, and property journey. And this week, we did dive deeper into all aspects of buying property in Brisbane and the benefits of great professional buyers agents. So welcome back, and let's get invested again, Melinda and Scott.
Thanks for having us, Bushy. I'm looking forward to this episode.
Thanks, Bushy. Good to be back.
It's going to be topics that are near and dear to all of our hearts. But I guess just to set the scene on that, and well, I've touched it already a bit in the intro, tell us a bit about why you established Streamline Property Buyers, as well as what's unique about what you do and what you do differently.
So the why is because we wanted to provide the best possible property buying experience for people that wanted to position themselves in a home or investment in Brisbane. So we wanted to specialise in a local market. And what's different about our team is that we provide very transparent, ethical service levels. We care about our client outcomes, and we maintain excellence in terms of our service levels. So we're also focused on qualifications. So we've got 4 qualified property investment advisors within our team, all certified through the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, and a licensed builder. So it does make us the most qualified team in Brisbane as well.
Yeah, I think that's huge, Bushy, and something we set out at the very beginning. I think I touched, and if people listen to the last episode that we chatted about, we're pretty passionate about the qualifications. That's something that we're really, really passionate, and we set that goal for Streamline when we first started, is that our qualifications need to be, because you're dealing with people's money, their life, so we need to be able to do it in the correct way, build their wealth, create the memories, all those types of things, but having the qualifications there so that you can carry out all of the research and know what you're buying and why you're buying it, it's critical.
Yeah, well said. Well, as you know better than I, it's what you buy and where you buy it is probably the most critical exercise in relation to future performance. So given that, what do you see as the biggest mistakes that property investors make when buying a property?
I'm going to just put it out there and say relying solely on data. My background is research, and obviously I shared last episode that I have a PhD, so I understand research and the methodologies behind how data is collected, and I understand how that data is collected in the real estate industry. And my experience in identifying and analysing that data is that there's a lot of inconsistency and a lot of inaccuracy in property data. So anyone relying purely on property data, one, you're looking in the rear view mirror, and there's a reason why the windscreen is a lot larger than the rear view mirror, because we need to look forward. But 2, property data can be a little misleading if you're going to rely solely on data. I think data is a fabulous tool to use in conjunction with local expertise. So anyone relying solely on data could be making a big mistake.
Yeah, I think the combination is critical. And this, again, I know that we talk about the way that we work, the yin and the yang and those types of things, but the data is important, but also so is the physical property itself. I look at it, and we work different areas in the business. I'm not the data person by any way at all. That's Melinda's cup of tea. I let her dive into all the data and get the information and those types of things. But when it comes to buying a house, at the end of the day, especially in Brisbane, it's tin and timber, or it's brick and tile. It's the actual physical property that is standing there that people are purchasing and putting a lot of money into. So I think having that combination really helps to know, what the actual product is, and does the data stack up with it as well, to put it all together to create a package.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think the danger of data is, yes, they're good indicators to so you can sort of thread the needle and give you sort of validate and verify and give you a bit more confidence, but you can't put data on aesthetics, street appeal, owner-occupier appeal or how a property stands out or differentiates from every other property in the street area or precinct. So that's where that art form comes into play. And that art form can only be developed if you've got intuitive, intimate, local understanding of how that property sits relative to every other one. So some very good points there. In terms of that then, we look at the flip side. What are your top suggestions then on how to choose a location to buy a residential property and overcome some of those mistakes that you're seeing a lot of people making?
Well, we're very reliant on information from the past, but also we look at what is projected and what is coming. So as local area experts in Brisbane, we make ourselves aware of state planning schemes where there's a Southeast Queensland infrastructure plan, there's a Southeast Queensland regional plan. These plans are state government produced plans that enable us to see what has the state government got planned. We can overlay that with local government planning schemes to get an understanding of what has the local government got planned, because as investors with an investment time frame of 15 plus years, we need to understand what is Brisbane going to look like 15 years from now. So understanding population projections, understanding where development pipelines are coming in terms of land rezoning, higher density developments, infrastructure projects, employment opportunities. These things matter when it comes to identifying the right pockets within a location. Now, we are Brisbane experts, but we do not buy in all parts of Brisbane, especially for our property investors. There's locations within Brisbane that are no-go zones from a local's perspective, and there's other locations that are highly desirable. And we're wanting to also understand for investors which, based on their exit strategy, who are we trying to sell the property to, or are we going to retain it long term? Because if we buy a property that doesn't appeal to the demographic group who are the largest portion of the buying population, that is the owner-occupier, then we may be making a mistake. So understanding that the exit strategy, if the intent is to sell and we're wanting to actually resell, we want to be able to have a property that appeals to the largest segment of the market. So these are just some of the things that we would consider in selecting a location to buy, because we want to make sure the location aligns with the objectives that the investor has.
Yeah, our checklist is pretty long. So when we look at property, it needs to tick the boxes. One of the biggest thing I think, which Melinda touched on then, is what's it going to look like in the future? Yeah. And if you have an exit, who are you going to sell it to? Because if there's something really different and unique about the property that you limit your people that you'll sell to, you're creating a smaller pool and it's at higher risk. What else is happening around you? Transport is massive. We are growing rapidly in Southeast Queensland, especially Brisbane. Fast forward to the Olympics, and even beyond that, our roads are going to be more and more and more congested. So these Brisbane people that have lived like a bit of a country life, I think, for a long time, where they've jumped in the car and driven everywhere, that will change. We will have to change lifestyle, and we'll be on public transport. So there's so many. Look, I can't actually name one or two because our checklist is so long when we start to go through it. And as Melinda said, buying in one suburb in one area, buying in one street in one suburb can be different to the street around the corner. In that local knowledge is something that you just need to know the area and know it really well.
Yeah, you make really good points there, because that's coming back to the intuitive art form that's associated with it, because the data gives you some hard numbers, but what is never measured, and you're only going to pick it up from being on the ground and understanding the local community, not just the area, is the sentiment factor, because you and I both know that sentiment is generational. If an area has a bad tag, doesn't matter how good it looks in terms of the data, the owner-occupiers, who are 70% of the buying population, that you want to sell that property to later on. So, this talk about investment-grade property, it's a bit of a nonsense to me. Yes, it's got to tick all the investment boxes, but if it doesn't appeal to a future owner-occupier, when you rationalise your portfolio at the end of the journey, you've done yourself a massive disservice and minimised the equity that you're going to pull out of that property. So that sentiment factor that I think is the piece that's missing. Using not a Brisbane example, but using an Adelaide example, because I know Adelaide particularly well, there's a lot of interstate buyers agents who've been piling investors into areas around Elizabeth, north of the city. Well, in the Playford area, well, that's a crime zone in a lot of those locations. I mean, I wouldn't walk down some of those streets in a bulletproof vest for fear of what might occur. But if you look on the desktop and you run the numbers, it looks fantastic. It looks affordable. It's great yields. It's got everything else attached to it. But in terms of that long-term infrastructure, industry, and income growth that you touched on before, if it hasn't got those forward projections and the sentiment isn't reinforcing that, then you're going to fall way short of where the opportunity ends up. And as you pointed out, that only comes if you intimately know not only the locations, but what the people think about properties in that particular location, which you can only get by living there, essentially.
We often find, and we've talked about this previously over the years, that a lot of people come to Brisbane applying the same principles of investment as they may have applied to their home city of Sydney or Melbourne, for example. And Brisbane's a very different city. One, we're a river city and we're built on flood zones, so the same principles don't apply for that reason. But two, we don't actually have an ocean, we have a bay, and the bay is actually quite muddy and prone to insects and midges at low tide. So just because a location might be next to the water, it doesn't make that location desirable, which is very different to a lot of locations in other cities. And so we see and have seen for many years interstate buyers agents that are not here on the ground, that are applying local principles to Brisbane, driving up property values in particular locations, which also can often, as you rightly pointed out, be locations that locals have zero desirability for. I mean, they're lower income areas, there's high crime, and they're not locations necessarily that the home buyers in Brisbane want to live in. So what happens over time, and this is something that we track with each update of the census data, is that ratio of owner-occupiers to investors starts to shift, and these locations become largely investor-dominated locations, which again presents as a risk to you as an investor, because when your rental property becomes available for rent, you're competing with so many others, and that can sometimes put downward pressure on rents over the long term. So these are all of the fundamentals, if you like, that we would assess to determine whether a location meets the criteria that we would use to recommend for our clients, because at the end of the day, 10 years from now, we want our clients to continue to be our raving fans. We don't want our clients to be trying to find us because we've gone out of business, because we've actually ripped off too many people. And unfortunately, I see the future in our space being like that for some businesses based on some of the recommendations that are being made out there in the market.
A really simple one for some people to think about is when we talk about what it's going to look like in the future, and I know that some people will struggle with 5, 10, 15 years in the future, but also how areas are changing now. Knowing Brisbane really well, okay, and Fortitude Valley, Newstead, in those areas, they were quite old. I remember Melinda talks about where we live in Wilston, and when she was growing up, because there was old Queenslanders in there, that's where the poor people lived.
It's a perception as a child.
That was a perception because she went out to the suburbs where they were living at the time, but that's what it was perceived to look like. Whereas now, these areas, you've got these microbreweries popping up. Okay, these are all the trendy places, the coffee shops, the lifestyle. And as you get all those sort of things start to change short-term wise, and that's what you need to look at that. How's it changing? They're the people that are going to move into those areas, and there's that lifestyle that comes with that type of change.
Yeah.
That gentrification that's added to knowledge of what's happening in planning, knowledge of what's happening in infrastructure. It's all out there for all of us to find. I'm just amazed that there aren't more professionals in the business, yet alone investors, focusing on that information. It's all in the public domain for us to find by free, just by Googling it. Yet all of the data that I see is all about the past. It's about And yes, that gives you an indication, but I'm more interested in that forward data and then what impact that's going to have on the gentrification and the change in sentiment, because I've found that it's generational. It takes 20 odd years to change the perception of an area, because once it's tainted in the minds and memories and the muscle memory of the people, it takes a long time for that critical mass to shift. And you touched on the percentage of rental properties. The other issues with that, particularly, if you get up over sort of 25%, in my opinion, of rentals in a particular area, then the level of care that goes into rental property in terms of presentation is nowhere near that of an owner-occupier, and that tends to dilute the perception of the location, which will drag down the potential capital growth and the value of the other properties that you...
100%, yeah. As landlords, you don't see many landlords wanting to invest money into upgrading their investment property, but you do see homeowners take a lot of pride in where they live. They'll look at COVID. We all got locked down. We went and painted our homes. We improved our gardens. We spent a lot of time in our home, but no landlords were doing that. It was the owner occupiers. So that fast-tracked some, value improvement in some locations, much more so than others. And, the principles, and we talk about this a lot, the principles that apply to other cities are not necessarily the principles that can apply to Brisbane, because we are a less mature city than the likes of Sydney and Melbourne. We only had high-density development come through in a larger scale after an update to our 2014 city plan, for example, whereas Sydney and Melbourne have been much higher density cities for a lot longer. We also have character Queenslander homes that largely are protected from demolition. That restricts development in certain areas in and around the CBD. Yeah. Despite land zoning, character overlays actually prevent and prohibit future development. So understanding the potential for future supply and where that's likely to come has a huge impact on how a property may perform over the next 20 or 30 years, because we're not looking at next year or 3 years from now, we're looking at 15 plus years. So this is how we're able to advise our clients, by looking at Brisbane as a whole. Where are the development areas likely to come based on, the planning schemes at various levels of government? What have government, or which areas of government already got earmarked for higher density development? How does that impact us as an investor if there's going to be an increase in dwelling supply in these pockets? And therefore, strategically, what decisions do we need to make now to get the maximum out of our future investment?
Beautifully said. We started touching on this already, but the subject of proper due diligence is something that's near and dear to my heart, because I just don't see it being done very well at times, if at all, really, in the true context. And you've mentioned quite a few of the areas that would feed into that, but can you sort of expand on that a little bit in terms of the detail of what you think's required to complete intensive due diligence on a property to be sure on its value or otherwise?
Look, there's the online due diligence that is the first step for us, and that's the step that anyone can make from wherever they sit. And that includes things like assessing the land zoning, the underground services, any character protection. Are we looking at flood mapping? We're looking at noise overlays. We're looking at anything that can be computer generated. However, that's just part of the parcel. If the due diligence passes those online assessments, then a physical inspection is an absolute must. It's non-negotiable. Looking online, it doesn't tell us if we've got a smell or, something that impacts us visually around the property. So you need to physically inspect to get a feel for those sorts of things. We've ruled out a number of properties, especially because we have the expertise of Scott, whereby a property may be advertised, for example, as a 4-bedroom property. And this happened as recently as 2 weeks ago on a property that was listed for sale by auction. 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom property advertised by the sales agent on the listing floor plan. When we arrived, we felt like the ceiling space was a little low. We actually left because we'd forgotten to take our laser measurer. So I popped back a little later to measure the ceiling height. And as we had suspected, not legal height according to building code, it triggered us to actually dig up some approved building plans when in fact that was not an approved bedroom. It was just being advertised as that. Now, any buyer in the market that's assessing the value of a 4-bedroom home versus a 3-bedroom home would know that that's going to significantly impact the perceived value. Now, rightly or wrongly, whether that property was advertised correctly, in Queensland, there is no seller disclosure at the moment. We are bringing that in. So it is up to the buyer to do their own due diligence and to make themselves familiar with these sorts of things. So, of course, that just changes the perception of value for us, and then we're able to advise our clients. But, Scott, there's other things that you would pick up at that we talk about with our team as well.
So there's a whole range. As I mentioned earlier, we have a whole checklist that we go through. So through council portals where we look at zoning, not just what it's zoned now, but what's it's zoned to look like in the future. Overlays. We're a river city. Okay, we do flood, and there's not just river flooding. So in Brisbane, we've got overland flow, we've got river flooding, we've got creek flooding. You keep got noise overlays, and again, whether it's from a train, a plane, or a car, there's the noise overlays. As Melinda touched on, underground services. You buy a property that in the future you might think, I'll put a pool in, or I might. Whoever buys it off me in the future might want to put a pool in, and there's a sewer line running through the backyard. Contours are a big one. Okay, knowing the actual fall of the land, because we do get some really heavy storms up here in Queensland. And if there's a lot of water rushing to that house, if say it's an investment property and the water rushes down the driveway and straight through the bottom area, all of a sudden you've got insurance claims and hassles, and no one wants hassles for investment properties. So there's so many things that we look at. And then as again, Melinda touched on the physical inspection, it's not just physically inspecting that house, but it's also driving the street and the neighbourhood. Don't just drive to the property, have a look at the property and drive out. Drive in one way, drive out a different way. And actually look at the houses in the street and see how well they're taken care of and who's living there. And, if there's a car there with it's jacked up with its tyres sitting off, I mean, there's some obvious things you can look at. I'm not saying that cars jacked up, I'm not putting those sort of people down, but, there's things you can look at in the neighbourhood, because that's the whole neighbourhood you're buying in. Okay, and that is how that area is going to change and be in the future. And that's the sort of tenant you'll get, especially on the investment side of it. That's who you'll attract as a tenant. Okay, so you've just got to make sure, not just the house, but everything around the house as well. And obviously then there's the building and pest side as well. That's where we get in more detail. Whether one's supplied, obviously you need to know what you're looking at on that side of things. All licensed inspectors through QVCC in Queensland. They're all licensed, so they're independent. So if one is supplied, you need to know what you're looking at when you're reviewing that and make sure you check it out when you go to the inspection.
And I'll also just add on that, there's definitely some building and pest inspection reports that we will not rely upon if they are provided, because we know the building and pest inspectors quite well, having operated in this industry. And there's others that we feel more comfortable relying upon. And with a phone call to that building and pest inspector, you can quite often get that report put into the name of your buyer should they be successful with their offer. There's sometimes a small fee associated with that, but having the advantage of an in-house builder provides our clients with peace of mind that they can potentially rely on those reports. And we've ruled properties out, for example, that have had stair rises that have been inconsistent, which is non-compliant with the current building code, which puts landlords at risk if someone falls. So those sorts of things, come up in reports, which then gives us the ability to advise clients as to whether it makes sense from an investment perspective, because what we want to do is mitigate risk, not expose our clients to risk.
Yeah, I love that. There's a number of things there that I think are really important, that the average Joe, whether they're just getting into it or having done it a number of times, but not to that level of detail of overseeing, and things like looking at the area and the property at different times of the day even. I know myself that I often like to look at a property in the evening or just on work to see just how busy is it, what level of noise and what other stuff's going on in that particular location at those times of day, because it can look beautiful in the middle of the day, but it
will drop off and pick up. Yeah,
exactly. So those things come into it as well. I guess the other thing that I would like your thoughts on, given the Brisbane perspective here and broadening the discussion a little bit, and wearing your Reba hat, I guess, to some degree as well, Melinda, which I'll dive into a bit more detail in a minute. but there's a lot of buyers agents that are pushing regional areas in Queensland and also pushing the apartment market in and around Brisbane. What's your read on both of those, to put it in context, particularly of a long-term capital growth investor? Can you share your insights in that area?
Look, I'll start by saying I'm not an expert in markets outside of Brisbane, but I keep track of markets at a national level because of my national role. The biggest concern that I have about some of the regional areas is the exposure to risk, especially in terms of insurance risk. So the further north you go in Queensland, for example, the further or the more you potentially are exposed to cyclone risk, for example. And a lot of the insurance providers can provide cover, but a lot of the times those premiums are extremely high. And so we often quote the gross yields when we're looking at the property purchase, how much does the property cost to buy and how much rental income are we going to generate per week. But it's the net yield that investors need to be looking at. And a lot of the time, once you account for some additional costs associated with risk, that is insurance, especially in relation to flood and also cyclone in Queensland, it can actually reduce that net yield significantly. So I would encourage investors to ask a lot of questions, but also urge on the side of caution, because you need to ensure that you understand your net return, not just your gross return. So if we now circle back to the unit market, in Brisbane, for example, units at a median value level, they're yielding gross at 4.5%, whereas the house market is yielding gross at 3.4%. So naturally, properties with smaller land content typically have a higher return on investment in terms of the rental income. Not all units in Brisbane are created equal. I'm going to preface everything that I'm going to say with that. Yeah. When you're buying a unit, if you're looking for yield, that's a very different type of asset that you would be targeting versus if you're looking for a combination of yield and growth. So if you're looking for growth, the land component is still critical and the land to asset ratio is still critical. Now, because Brisbane is quite unique because we have a lot of character overlays, you do have the ability to pick up some low density units in areas dominated by character Queenslander homes where we know there's absolutely no potential for future supply. And you might pick up a quality 2 or 3 bedroom unit in a blue chip location that's yielding at a higher rate than a house, but still has a stronger land to asset ratio when we look at land value rather than land size. Yes. And the big thing for a lot of people is they focus on land and land size, but I can absolutely categorically say not all land is created equal. And the more scarce that land, the higher the value on a square metre basis. So regardless of the asset type that people are focusing on, we always should still come back to what is the land to asset ratio for that asset and how does that investment align with the investor's objectives? Because we do find in Brisbane, because yields have dropped, and especially in a lot of those blue chip locations, it has become unaffordable for some people to purchase a house to hold long term. So depending on their circumstances, they have to weigh up whether they target a house that might actually be further out, in which case they may have to compromise on some other criteria that we would typically require for a high growth location. Or alternatively, to stay in higher growth locations, sometimes we will consider those low density units in areas which are surrounded by character homes which are protected from demolition, where we know there's zero potential for future supply, and they're going to actually attract a higher gross yield. Now, I talk about gross yield because then the next step is assessing body corporate fees, better known as strata fees, because we also need to ensure that the strata fees are low with the insurance costs, which are covered by body corporate, as well as savings, I guess you could say, with rates and maintenance. Generally, the net yields would be aligned with what a house further out would be. So then it's just actually overlaying the growth component. So again, these are our opinions based on what we know about Brisbane and where we're heading in the future. And I would just say not all units are created equal. If you are buying a unit, you have to actually overlay that with an extra level of due diligence, in my opinion, to ensure that the location you're targeting has a strict, limited an amount of future supply and buy in the locations where you know that supply is constrained.
Beautifully summed up and very well said. I think, and I'm going to talk personally now, but if we go back to the regional piece, I just wouldn't buy a property in Townsville and Rockhampton personally, because of, yes, they've got pretty strong growth in terms of some of the growth drivers, but that risk piece, which people love to focus on the rewards, they don't think about the risks. I know damn well that within some of those areas and others within regional Queensland, because of the extreme weather risk increases, and that's flood, fire, and cyclones, some of the specialist insurers now, they ask you for the actual address to tell you whether they're going to be prepared to insure it or not. And if they do, then the premium is likely to be very high and affect what you touched on, and that is the net yield. The gross yield's one thing, but it's the net yield that's the really important piece that comes into play there. So I think very well covered on that. And again, don't follow the horde. Just because a bunch of market-making buyers agents out there are doing the Pied Piper and herding people into these locations, and therefore FOMO, you're fighting over each other and artificially boosting up the price, doesn't mean it's going to be sustainable. So I think you need to take that strategic view that you've touched on. And in relation to the apartment piece, I think I love what you talked about there, Melinda, because it's about getting really detailed about the strategy and the fit, because it's a scarcity piece that we're really focusing on, versus, again, there's a lot of generalist buyers agents who are talking up apartments generally, and there's an affordability catch-up that's going on, just like that's happening in Adelaide and Perth. It's just a relatively affordability catch-up. So there's a lot of people piling in there because they can afford to buy them. It doesn't mean they're going to be a good asset long-term.
That's right. Yep.
But if you've got that scarcity piece and the land value piece that you spoke about, and then you can measure that against a standalone home that might be further out, then you can make a fully informed decision on what is the best asset to suit your specific strategy and long-term needs. So I love the way you talked about that. And what I love generally about what you talk about, not into motherhood statements and generalized truisms. It's getting down to, okay, let's understand your strategy. What are you trying to achieve? And then we can gauge a particular property opportunity in that context to see whether it's the best fit to actually satisfy your long-term goals. So very refreshing in that context to put that piece around it rather than the motherhoods that I hear elsewhere, which leads me beautifully into a broader discussion around buyers agents, I guess, guys. And while we've touched on a fair bit of this in both today and in last week's episode, but and again, I'm wanting to wear your Reba hat here to a fair degree as well in this one. Why do you think property buyers should engage a local buyers agent over finding and buying a property themselves, or using a nationwide buyers agent to do the same thing?
Look, we're a business like buyers agents everywhere across Australia where we're fee for service. So you're wanting to actually ensure that you're getting the expertise that you're paying for. Now, if you're focusing on a buyer's agent that can buy anywhere across the nation, they may be the buyer's agents that rely on data, but do they have the local expertise to understand the right street and the right house within the street to make the best recommendation for you? Because this is where we question the value proposition with some of those services. Obviously, being a local buyer's agent, we have access to the same data, but we become experts in our local market, and it enables us to not only advise on locations. Data brings you to a suburb, but also locations within a suburb based on local understanding and, buyer preferences. And then I think that becomes the critical piece. Within our industry as a whole, the biggest concern I have as the REBA president is the fact that there's so many buyers agents that are starting up businesses without much experience, and the service that they're providing to clients is diluting the effectiveness or the value of the service that other buyers agents who provide a very detailed and holistic service may be providing. So the biggest concern I have is that the more people that engage with buyer's agents that are more transactional and less focused on true advocacy for the buyer, the more diluted the service becomes. Whereas for buyers that actually partner with a quality buyer's agent who provides true advocacy and risk mitigation and investment advice for those that also deal with investors, it really is a very different proposition. And the hardest thing right now is that it's very difficult for a consumer to distinguish the difference because marketing can be very deceptive.
I just on that, Bushy, my background is obviously construction, not real estate. Getting into this industry, and I think it's a great service. Don't get me wrong. I know we sort of talk about buyer's agents not doing the right thing here and there. There's really good buyer's agents, very, very good ones, and very highly qualified. They know their area. They know a lot of information, and they are a fantastic service for people that are time poor, that want help investing, that don't know how to invest. They can change people's lives. Okay, so there's a great opportunity for there. There's also some that come in the industry that get taught how to get clients, but not how to buy property and how to do your due diligence and all those types of things. So there's a whole range of it. Melinda's just recently completed a buyer's agency training course with the REIQ, and it's teaching people how to be a buyer's agent. Okay, not how to generate leads or how to be a social media person or TikToker. I'm not a TikToker, but to do those things to get leads. But then what do you do, and how are you investing? It's a partnership, and that's the way we look at it. Okay, so when someone wants to come and work with us, it's a partnership. They've got to be a good match for us. We've got to be a good match for them. It needs to work both ways, and I think it's a fantastic service when it's done right with the right people.
100% agree. It's like everything. It's the few very good players that often get drowned out by the shonks and the fly-by-nighters. And because there's been very low barriers to entry into the buyer's agent space, that's allowed a horde of people to come in and do these, 1-week courses basically and call themselves a buyer's agent, which is very scary. But what I'd love for you to share, given your personal involvement in the industry, but also again wearing your Real Estate Buyers Association of Australia hat, Melinda, because for the average punter out there, and I see this all the time when they're out there, they're trying to work out, well, who should I engage, and often they're attracted to the high profile people who have their own podcasts and they present extremely confidently, and they use data to self-justify what they're saying about where and what. What are the key things that are going to enable them to actually sort the sheep from the goats when it comes to selecting a good buyer's agent?
Look, I think it's a great question to ask. On the REBA website, we actually have a list of questions to ask a buyer's agent, and I know you put that information out as well, Bushy, and I encourage people to rely on these sorts of resources so that you can get a much broader and holistic view of who the person is or the company is that you're choosing to partner with. Because the biggest thing that's hard to understand is, are they working ethically? Are they being transparent? And do they have your best interests at heart? Because as I pointed out, marketing can be somewhat misleading. We know, because we've partnered with so many clients that have used other buyer's agents in the past, they've had a terrible experience, and consequently they've sought out a different service. Now, when we hear these stories, and the more we hear these stories, the more we want to advocate for what a buyer's agent should actually do and what that minimum service should look like. So for consumers that are wanting to understand who is a good operator, starting with who is a REBA member is a good place to start, because we actually do have to ensure that every member meets minimum standards in terms of a professional code of conduct that we operate and abide by, but also what are the systems and processes that we implement within our business to take a client through that journey. And I think this is a big part that's missing for many new entrants. They get their clients through a lead pipeline that they've created, but they have no system or process in terms of what they need to do to effectively manage that client from the onboarding phase through the purchasing journey and right through the back end. And we've heard through our own clients who have partnered with others previously that there's very little support through many parts of that process. Once the transaction's done, it's done, and that the hands are wiped. Whereas a true advocate will actually handhold and ensure that that person has a partner through the entire transaction and for many years beyond. And that's what a true advocate or buyer's agent should be providing in terms of a service.
100%. The buyer's agent is paid by the investor or the property buyer, and therefore their sole focus should be on protecting their interests. What's sadly been the case is that I'm seeing a lot of these buyer's agents who are fast tracking to build these massive empires in a very short space of time will shift from being initially focused on the client to eventually becoming a post box for the selling agents or lazy agents who are looking to sell properties untested to unsuspecting investors who don't really understand the quality of the asset they're picking up and don't realise that they're paying a premium for something that's probably not going to perform at its best long term anyway. So there's a number of issues in the industry there that need to be encountered. And again, sadly, one of the things that's grown out of our know-how business that sits underneath the work we do on the podcast exercise is we've set up basically a secret agent, John West of Property service, to actually become the buyer's true protective partner to actually validate what a buyer's agent's suggesting to actually make sure that it's truly in the best interest of the client. That's not a service we want to offer, by the way. It's one I want to get out of by dealing with reputable buyer's agents like yourselves. And there are, as you say, some very good operators around the country that add significant value to the whole process. The search, the selection, the negotiation, the whole component of that. It's worth its weight in gold if you've got someone who's really doing the job well. And the average person who's doing this part-time is never going to achieve the results that a really good buyer's agent's going to achieve. But very keen, as I'm sure you are too, Melinda, within the context of Reba, to shake the tree and make people aware and give them the tools to be able to sift the sharks or the wolves from the sheep when it comes to this exercise, to make sure that when they do spend good money to get a good result, then they're actually getting what they've signed up for. So I love that. Now, we've touched on this subject a bit, and this is another pet hate of mine, I guess, because this is another thing that I talk to people. As soon as I hear a buyer's agents saying that the majority of their properties are off market, then that's a big red flashing light to say, go somewhere else to me, because you and I both know that, there are real reasons for off-market properties, but that probably represents 5% of the properties on the market. And I saw a buyer's agent the other day who was promoting the fact that 99% of their properties are off-market. Well, that's a very scary concept for me, because if you ask someone who's selling a property, why would you do it silently when you want as many people knowing about it to pay as much as they possibly can to get that property? Then there's a fair bit of smoke and mirrors in the equation to me. What's your view on the whole off-market piece?
Bushy, I'll jump in. I loved your last comment when you said someone doing it part-time. We do this pretty much 24/7. I don't know how someone does it part-time, for starters, but the off-market it's not something we advertise any way, shape or form. I've probably said it to some people before, and yes, we've talked about we have a portfolio ourselves, especially in Brisbane at the moment, the current market conditions. And I simply say to someone, if you ask me to sell one of my properties at the moment off market, I would probably say, well, how much do you want to pay me? So if you want to pay me a lot of money, yeah, maybe I will consider it. Otherwise, I'll take it to market and I'll let everyone else tell me in the market what they think it's worth.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, there are circumstances. Okay, so yes, there's privacy, there's death, there's divorces, there are reasons people do want to sell off market, and that again, people that might not want to present their home. They don't want the hassle of everyone walking through their home, having to clean it twice a week, and all those hassles of people walking in, strangers coming in and out of their house. There are reasons, but they're the sort of things that we work on, pardon me, as a buyer's agent, and we get to know that. Why, Mr. A, why are they selling? What are their reasons for selling? Have they bought somewhere else? Have they moved on? What are the reasons for them wanting to sell it off market? Because if it's just price, then it's probably not a good off market.
And we always advocate for finding the property that is the best property for the client. Now, we have no control as buyer's agents over which properties are presented off market and which properties are actually listed for sale. That's something between the vendor and the agent. So I'm not going to specifically exclude a property that comes to the market just because it's not an off market property. So I find it quite humorous that someone would be advertising that they'd be buying 99% of properties off market because you're effectively saying there's nothing on market that's suitable in a price point that our clients would be willing to pay. So we like to say that we will expose our clients to 100% of the market. A lot of that will be on market and there will be a portion that is off market, but we will always assess that off market property to determine whether the price that the vendor might be asking for sits in line with our objective appraisal based on value, or alternatively, if it's overpriced. And we will simply not engage if it is overpriced. Quite often vendors need to see a property come to market to receive some price feedback before they're willing to meet the market. So anyone that's consistently and advertising that the majority of properties that they're buying are off market, they're either buying properties that are not in areas that are competitively sought after, so vendors think they're not going to get a price, or alternatively, they're admitting that they're stretching their client to pay whatever it takes for the privilege to buy off market. Now, if we're going to segregate our client data or our client load here at Streamline into home buyers and property investors, we probably see a higher portion of home buyers transacting off market, because when you find the one, if it is off market, they will pay an emotional premium to secure the home of their dreams. Okay. Whereas for investors, we typically buy a lower volume off market, even though we might present and see those properties off market. So it is all about ensuring that we don't overpay, because our whole role as an advocate is to act in the best interest of our client, and that does not include paying more than it takes just for the privilege to buy off market.
Just one other thing, when Melinda talked about properties on market, there is nothing wrong with them just because they go to the market. What you generally find, I suppose, is a bit open to say, but some good agents, if they get a listing from a client, they'll possibly go in and do some repairs and some touch-ups and some maintenance, present the property really well. So they're actually doing extra work to present the property. They'll probably get a building and pest inspection done to find if there are any issues there, and make sure that they address those issues before they go to the market. So if you think about it that way, you're buying something that someone's just going to say, well, you pay that, you buy it off market, or hang on, I'm actually going to get a tradie in, or I'm going to clean the house up, I'm going to get some repairs done, I'm actually going to sell you something that's had some maintenance and prepared the property to go to market as well.
Yeah, very well said. I think there's also a very clear distinction between pre-market, so something's about to go on market, but it hasn't quite got there yet because they haven't listed on the web and they're still preparing the stuff behind the scenes. But their intention is to go to market, and if you've got good relationships and you pick up on those, and there's something that's a great fit for a buyer, then that's a very different discussion.
100%.
Versus the ones that are off market or silent listings that have a distinct smell and need to be really well justified before it's even worth considering. So I love your thoughts on that. Let's now broaden the view in terms of the future, because we've all very focused on what the future holds for property moving forward. And given we've come out of a situation where the old pandemic petrol has poured a lot of fuel onto property right across Australia in recent years. And I want you to answer this from the Streamline perspective, but again, throwing on the old Reba hat, Melinda. Love your read on property conditions in the medium term, and where you think the best opportunities are within the Queensland context, particularly southeast Queensland, given that's your area of expertise, and its relativity to what's happening in other parts of the country?
Look, I could talk for a whole hour on this alone because this is what I study and this is the information that we use to educate our clients on when they're actually partnering with us. My take on Brisbane is the long-term opportunity in Brisbane, but southeast Queensland as a whole is quite significant, and there's a number of reasons for that. So the Olympic Games is an event that is going to take place on a particular date in 2032. A lot of people ask us, is this going to cause property values to increase? And I answer no. The event itself will not have the impact that people think it will have. However, let's consider and unpack what has to happen here in Brisbane and southeast Queensland as a whole over the next 8 years to deliver the infrastructure that is required to host the Olympic Games. And this is now where the conversation starts to change, because we have 3 levels of governments actually putting money into fast-tracking infrastructure development that is going to create an enormous economic boost to certain parts of southeast Queensland. The job opportunities are going to be continuously there. We actually already have really strong employment throughout southeast Queensland, and therefore people will have the opportunity to create for themselves more income earning potential because of the opportunity that's available to them. Now, the infrastructure development is going to be, yes, there's going to be stadiums, we understand that, but the longer term benefit to property owners is in that transportation infrastructure. The way we move around the city will change. The areas where there's going to be higher density development to accommodate, for example, the athletes village, we know that where that's going to be. What does that mean for that local property market? We can advise our clients on that. What does that southeast Queensland plan require us to do to deliver more accommodation to our growing population between now and then? Where are those dwellings likely to be built? Where is the future land supply? These are all questions. I'm not answering your question, but I'm giving you other questions that investors need to ask themselves, because these things then lead to the locations that we would be recommending. And we overlay all of that potential supply and demand based on infrastructure, job opportunity, etc. We overlay that with, can people in that area, that suburb, that region afford the properties that are available in that area? Because a lot of people talk about affordability at a price point. We don't. Yeah. We talk about affordability at a median value for the demographic that lives in that location. There are some very unaffordable properties or locations in Brisbane at price points, below $700,000. And there are some very affordable locations in Brisbane at median value price points above $1.5 million. And what is critical, in my opinion, for investors to understand is the difference, because price alone should not be the only criteria. So it's an understanding of the breakdown of owner-occupiers and investors in a location, the incomes that the people in those locations are earning. You're laughing.
I love it. You're sounding like me again, Melinda. We obviously gone to the same school of belief in relation to property, guys, because I often talk about the interrelatedness of future growth drivers of infrastructure, which you've touched on, and that's road, rail, technology, industry diversity and growing industries that are happening in a particular location. And the underpinning, the thing that's either a handbrake or an enabler, is income. So if the incomes aren't at a level that enables the purchase price power, and people can't afford to keep spending more on properties in the location, that's going to hold the growth back. So you need all of those in combination, plus everything else that flows in behind all of that. Yep. But what I'm loving about what you're sharing, and you're absolutely right, in the context of the future growth drivers, not just focusing on the Olympics either, but that is going to cause a lot of infrastructure growth that will have pre and post impacts beyond the 12 days or whatever the Olympics runs, in conjunction with the critical mass that attracts around it in terms of that ongoing industry growth. Because, if you want to get really simple about property, if you just follow the jobs, then all that stuff that we're talking about gets wrapped into that. And all of those things that are happening are very positive indicators for what's happening in specific locations within
Correct.
the area. So I know we're on the same page here as well. You don't put a blanket over a whole area. You don't make decisions purely on median values of anything. But what it does do is start to point you in directions of particular precincts and locations that we can then relate back to what the individual investor's capacity is to come up with the best fit solution. But it's definitely got a very strong sustainable, and I emphasize the word sustainable here, opportunity for those that are playing the long game. Within that then, so a bit of a relativity here because, again, I don't want to play my hand too much here, but I think we're returning to normal. I think the fuse of the pandemic is just about burning out, and the fundamentals underpinning locations are going to be back to where it is. And the sort of growth rates that we've seen long term, we're getting closer to that, and that's normal, and that's actually good from where I sit. But I'd love your perspective, given that you're looking at this all day, every day.
Look, I think it comes down to we're ahead of the market. We can see who's lining up at what properties. That's an indication of current demand. That's quite often then reflected in the data 2 or 3 months from that moment in terms of price movement. So we're still seeing high demand in the unit and townhouse segment of the market, especially in inner and middle ring locations of Brisbane. The median value for a Brisbane house right now sits just under $980,000. That segment of the market in Brisbane is still hotly contested. There's still a strong depth of buyers looking for the average house, if you might say. When we look at the top end of the market, the volume of buyers has definitely come off 100%. Yeah. We're seeing more properties transact off market in that top end of the market, and I'm talking that $3 million plus, because the buyer depth is just not there. And obviously the investment for those sellers to bring a property to the market can be quite significant. So there's a little bit more activity, especially for home buyers in that top end of the market. But I see stamp duty thresholds here in Queensland have lifted just this year up to property values up to $700,000. So anything under that threshold will continue to grow because the demand has shifted there off the back of policy change and government intervention. So we feel that that's still going to be a strong segment of the market, but also anything at around that median value in the house market, providing it's going to be in areas where people's incomes can support those higher interest repayments, we believe that's still going to be a competitively sought after segment of the market as well.
Yeah, no, very well said. And if we again, I'm taking a medium to longer term view here, given that, you know, we talked about, and I love your expression, the microwave approach to property, looking for instant hot results. Looking beyond that, in the relativity of Southeast Queensland to other parts of the country, what's your thoughts around that?
Well, we know Southeast Queensland has very little land left, but 75% of the land that is yet to be developed, or what we call developable land, is coming from the Logan and the Ipswich City Council regions. So if you're looking for a house in these regions, there will be future supply that is coming that you need to be aware of. So it's important to understand how that may impact your investment over the long term. Also to the northwest of Caboolture, that is where the supply pipeline for land is coming in the future, if you're looking in that Moreton Bay region. Brisbane City Council as a region has very little developable land left. So then it's about understanding where the higher density pockets are. And as I pointed out previously, the inner 5 or 6 kilometre ring typically will be character protected homes, regardless of any zoning that exists within that location. The character protection means they cannot be removed from the site to allow for higher density development. So if you're buying a unit in Brisbane, avoiding that higher density market, you're really wanting to be within the areas where the character overlays exist. Anything outside of that can potentially create a supply risk down the track.
I love it. And again, that scarcity overlay is really key there, and knowing where the greenfield development sites are, which are obviously going to dilute value because it dilutes the scarcity.
Yeah.
And then knowing where the tightness is, and therefore where that the acute tightness is at a relatively affordable price points, given the fact that we're not likely to see rates move in a big direction anytime soon. So purchasing price power is going to continue to be constrained, which tends to focus in on those areas and other types of property like units and apartments that in a normal kettle of fish probably wouldn't be something to consider, but there's an opportunity base there that the people can take advantage of, given that ongoing demand is going to be pretty strong moving forward.
And I think also we're finding a lot of investors actually, because of the current lending environment, can often have yield requirements. If that is the case, we need to ensure that they're reaching the minimum amount of rent per week in order to satisfy funding. Now, sometimes when we're moving into more affordable locations in the housing market, we are moving into locations where incomes might be much lower, and therefore rental price growth has actually been capped, and we're now at a point where there's a lack of rental affordability in those markets. So again, we assess all of that for our clients. It's not just about can people afford to buy, but it's also about can people afford to rent, and based on where their incomes are and how much it's already costing them to rent, is this sustainable or is this an at-risk market? Because as investors, we're interested in the overall capital return long term, but we are also interested in the income that our asset's going to generate. So we want to have stability and low risk of that income. I was just talking to someone earlier who has an asset in their portfolio in an area that doesn't meet our selection criteria. And I didn't say that, it was just a conversation. But obviously when people come to us, they already have sometimes a portfolio. And they said that they've had nothing but issues with finding a quality tenant because of the demographic that lives there. So they've had rental defaults, they've had property damage. And these are the things that a lot of people often don't talk about. And this is what we as an organisation, and certainly people that are aligned with the REBA Code of Conduct, it's our job to identify these sorts of risks for our clients so that they understand exactly what they're going to get. Because the last thing that you want is to buy a headache for yourself and then have to manage your property manager who's trying to manage a tenant who's causing all sorts of problems for you.
100%. My good wife, having owned and run a very successful property management business, always used to say the quality of the landlord generally goes with the quality of the property, which ends up being the quality of the tenant. So if you don't get those right, then you've inherited a headache.
Yeah.
So love your thoughts on all of that, and I think you make some very good points there as well around the affordability piece again, which I think very few people in the industry focus on. They focus on what you're paying for property. Well, if we're going to hold a property for 15 years plus, we want to make sure that it's not burning a massive hole in our pocket. And again, you use the same software that we do to analyse what the actual true holding cost is when every cost in both buying and holding the property is put into play to see whether it actually fits the affordability piece from the client. Because if that's not going to work, then you're doomed before you start. Doesn't matter how good the asset is, it's not going to work.
We've had clients who, in a strategy session, make the choice not to proceed and go ahead with a purchase once they really understand, because I think that there's so many people who are relaying a message around the fact that property can achieve all of these outcomes for you. But the reality is when you actually really understand all of the holding costs and the way their finance might be structured, and especially if someone's using equity and they've got a 100%, they're borrowing 100% plus costs and interest rates are at 6.5% or thereabouts, and you might be buying a property that's yielding at, somewhere between 4 and 4.5%. Therefore, just on the interest alone, you're actually not making money, but you haven't even started to account for the holding costs, property management fees, rates, insurance, maintenance. These are all of the things that it's critical to make allowances for. And then people think P&I lending is going to enable them to hold a property in a cash flow neutral position. But in actual fact, with interest rates so high, again, that becomes very prohibitive. And in fact, more recently in strategy sessions, we've actually just started to show people this is what it was like when COVID was hit. And this is where interest rates were. And so, yes, at that time, this would have been a scenario that's very different to today. And this is probably what you're still hearing about by others in the industry. This doesn't exist anymore, and this was very unlikely to ever exist again because they were very extreme circumstances. This is more normal, and this is what we need to base our investment decisions on, not the past, but the current, and potentially stretch test that in case we ever see more rate hikes in the future.
100%. And you make a couple of really good points there. It's affordable growth that people should be, with affordable underlined. Because if you're living on dog food and 2-minute noodles for 15 years to hold on to the property, you're not going to do it. It just won't happen. But the financing piece you touched on something that's near and dear to my heart, but I get frustrated with people rate chasing, and they'll go for P&I rates, but they don't realise they're paying 30 to 35% higher in terms of repayments, which affects their affordability.
Correct.
And if you've got a P&I loan and an investment loan and you're paying it down, guess what? You're reducing your tax deductibility at the same time.
Correct. Especially when there may be personal debt that, they have in a home loan at the same time. So these are the things that it's so important to highlight.
It's the devil's in the detail. And if you get all of these aspects right, then you're going to produce a sustainable investment and an asset that's going to produce the fruit. But if you dance over the top of these and ignore that and just look at the headlines, that's when you get yourself into trouble. So look, again, we're on exactly the same page. I love talking to you guys. Every time I catch up with you, it's just energizing to talk to people who actually think the same way, because it's sadly a bit of a rarity. So I'm definitely going to get you back on the show to expand on other elements and deep dive on some of these aspects, so that we're really opening investors' eyes in particular to how to do it properly. But jumping into round 2 of the old ambush round now, guys, the quick fast 4, what's your favourite quote and why?
Oh, I'm actually going to use one I use at work, and I probably say this, I don't know how many times I say this at work, but I always say to all of our staff, if I wouldn't buy it, I wouldn't recommend it to a client.
Yep.
I live by that.
Mine is a few lines, so bear with me. Hard work is a choice. Attitude is a choice. Discipline is a choice, and doing extra is a choice. There are no shortcuts for success.
That's gold. Yeah, I actually haven't heard that, but I love that one. Turning to the literary field for a second, then, what's the top book that you'd recommend we read and why?
I'm just going to handball this straight to Melinda, Bushy, because I'm not a book reader. He's the book reader.
I read the books and I summarise them for Scott. But my favourite of all time is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. Love it. Teach my team it, and we live by that as a business as well. And this is what we teach our clients.
Yeah, it's an awesome book. I love it. I'm a book freak, Scotty. I've always got at least 4 books on the go. My Kindle overheats. I read so much because I just love them. That's why I got myself involved in the Business Book Awards. So I've got an excuse to do it now without annoying my wife Sonia because I just do it anyway. But turning back to the investment arena for a second, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've both received?
The worst advice that I've received is that all properties are the same. They're all created equal. And the best piece of advice is that you should buy when you can afford to do so.
Yeah, well, Melinda's just stolen my best one, because I'm a big believer of that as well, is if you can afford to buy it. Not that I've listened to this one, but I've probably heard it a lot with people, even that talk to us sometimes about buying brand new, a home and land package. I'm just not a believer of it.
Yeah. Mind you, I do want to qualify that though, Scotty, because I'll be straight. I get annoyed. There's a lot of buyers agents in the space who absolutely poo-poo building.
Mm-hmm.
When we all know, because I know you've done it, if you can get the same quality property with the same level of scarcity, and I'm probably talking an infill property here where you can build it and save on stamp duty and then have all the depreciation benefits working for you, providing you can fix the cost, the delivery time and the quality, then I'd build every time.
Great
but
depreciation benefits. Yeah.
I've got a bit of a bias there because I used to be an architect, so I'm very comfortable with the whole building process. But the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater a little bit on that, and that people just blanket building is a bad thing to do.
Yep.
I certainly don't aspire to that at all. Yes, buying a house land package amongst thousands of others, massive
Off
muster.
a property spruiker usually. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And they're getting 30 grand in their back pocket from the developer to try and flog an average asset. Big issue with that. But if you're buying scarcity and all the other boxes are ticked, but you can build, then there are some. And coming back to that affordability piece that we spoke about in terms of the holding costs ongoing, significantly better on a build than that is on the existing. So again, I'm sorry to jump into that, Scott, but I just, because the listeners out there, they'll go, oh, don't build. Well, no, it's not build. It's just don't buy a house and land package in an endless sea of others. That's
From an investment seminar.
20 years, because that's where the wheels fall off.
True. Thanks for clearing that up, because that's exactly what I meant. Because if you buy, as you said, in that new estate, and you buy in stage 1, and then stage 2 opens up, and stage 3 opens up, and you're not
forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I agree totally. I have no problem with the building side of it. Yeah, in a good location where the scarcity is there on that land.
In fact, we've helped clients with that.
Yeah,
knock
we've
down
helped
rebuilds
clients
and
with
things
that.
today. Yeah.
Knock down rebuilds, knock down split into 2, build. Yeah, and it's a great strategy.
It's an awesome strategy, and a lot of buyers agents will knock it. Why? Because then they don't have the skills to do that, so they shoehorn people into just buying existing.
Yep.
And it sounds attractive when it's put, because they sort of de-risking it, but I think they're missing an opportunity if the right scarce opportunity is there. So sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a rant on that one, but last question on this: if you could wave a magic wand and change anything, what would you change about buying property in the buyer's agent industry?
I'd increase the barriers to entry and, ensure that buyer's agents that are representing clients have minimum qualifications and some level of professional development, without a doubt.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm all on qualifications again, Bushy. If I revert this back to my building side of things, and I'll always say we did, as I said previously when we had a chat with you, 4-year apprenticeship, you do a diploma for building. Once you do all that and you do your time and you get your qualifications, you're a low-rise builder. Once you get the more experience and you get up to become a medium-rise builder, once you've got experience and the knowledge again, you become a high-rise builder. You go up the scale on your qualifications. That's my personal thoughts on the buyers. I think people should be almost scaled, because there is a service that people want, which might be the low-rise. But there's also a service that people want, which are here. Now, if people are scaled that way, you can then, as a consumer, you can select the service that you're after. Okay, so there's a variety of it, and that's how you can actually change it a little bit. That's just an idea.
Love it.
Never happened.
Final question, guys, because I'm mindful that I've using up a lot of your time. If I ask you to get invested, what does that mean to you?
Create or improve your personal development through education, and then save the difference between what you earn and what you spend, and invest the difference.
Yeah, I think get invested is creating opportunity, and to whether it's choice in what you do in life later on down the track. But if you want to get smart invested, get in, do it smart, do the right thing. But yeah, and you can create a completely different life. It's there. If people want to do it, it's actually there.
Yeah, no, love it, guys. Look, I'm going to leave all of your details on the show notes for those that have really resonated with what you've shared, and particularly for investors who are looking to secure property in Brisbane and surrounds. No question that the thoroughness and attention to detail and the level of care that you bring to the equation is above and beyond a lot of people in the industry. So, I commend you for the work that you're doing, not only within the business, but also to educate and elevate the buyer's agent profession. As we've said a couple of times, it adds a lot of value to investors if they're dealing with true proven performers like yourselves, and anything we can be doing to open people's eyes to that opportunity and learn how to ignore the trappings of the others that may not be giving them what they look for is a joint mission that we both have. So look, thanks again for taking the time to refresh us on all of your wealth of wisdom on what we've shared in the last 2 episodes. But before we go, if anyone watching or listening would like to explore further how you can free up your time and create an income for life by investing in property properly, whether you're new to the game or an experienced investor or property player, feel free to explore your why, what and how of successful property that unpacks my 4 decades of property and life experience by tapping into our recently released Freedom Formula program. You can enjoy anytime, anywhere at your leisure by clicking the link on the show notes, and the first module is absolutely free. In addition, if you'd like to confidentially delve deeper into your specific needs or challenges, feel free to book in with me for a personal solution session by, again, clicking the link in the show notes, where you'll have the complete, dedicated and undivided attention of mine so that I can share my experience to help you solve your challenges and answer your questions for a full 60 minutes. And that brings us to the end of another great pair of property conversations. So remember to always get invested in your knowledge and your network before you invest in your assets. And thanks again for getting invested and let's make sure we keep the conversation going. Melinda and Scott.
Thanks, Bushy.
Thanks, Bushy. Good to chat, mate.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. Make sure you subscribe to Property Hub for free. Get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's top online property show for red-hot property investing news and insights direct from industry leaders and influencers. And finally, I'll see you next time.